My name's Tony Ugaldi. I'm the Director of Speech at San Marino High School here in sunny California. I'm also a four-diamond coach, and I'd like to welcome you to The Talk. This episode in particular is going to be about original oratory and things that you can do as a coach and any students who are watching this to kind of get you to that next level. Tonight, today, I'm joined with Noreen Rahman, who's one of my former students and current assistant coach with me at San Marino High School. Multiple national qualifier and state finalist is she. So Noreen, as we talk to these folks today, what are some of the things that you can think of as we introduce our video here about things that they could do to maybe try to go to that next level?
Definitely as a student, I was challenged with a multitude of different things in competition, outside of competition, and I had to pull together a lot of different skills in order to be prepared for the national level, because it definitely is different. And it was a little nerving as a student, but some of the things that I had to do was I had to kind of retrace and get back to that very authentic side of my oratory. I had to break down some of the things that I had even been doing throughout the year. I also had to fight a lot of motivational aspects, but a lot of those different things I was able to gain through my coaching. And those are the types of things that we'll be talking about today. Perfect.
So the first thing I want to talk about is, it's kind of that big question. We've qualified kids to nationals, they've qualified to TOC, they've qualified kids to NIETOC. What do we do next? Like, how do we get our kids into those national championship final rounds? So one of the things I want to tell you is I've been very fortunate and I have been blessed to have students at the TOC, at the NIETOC, and at the national break at every out-round level. So one of the things I do want to tell you right now is, first of all, I would tell you to calm down, relax. It's just another tournament. It can be very daunting. So sometimes when we qualify to nationals, it's because we'd like to see our students on those final round stages and break at those big levels. So one of the things that I would tell you is, first, calm down. Take it as just another tournament, because the calmer you are, the calmer your students will be. The calmer you are, the better your performance if there's a student who's out here watching that. So really quick, what I'm going to go over is kind of what my philosophy of oratory is. Things that worked for us, and they're not necessarily secrets, but things that have kind of have given students the tools to break into some of these wonderful rounds. Again, been blessed with really great students like Noreen here, who've had the talent and have had the trust in the process for us to get there. So the first thing I did want to kind of touch on was this idea of, I was one time asked when I was running a coach's clinic, what is the number one secret to your coaching, Tony? And you know what I told him? It was the funniest thing. I sat back and I said, okay, this is the biggest secret. So if I give it to you, you got to promise not to tell anybody. And so I said, so everybody take out their notebooks. So there's about 20 young coaches who were there. And they took out their notebooks and said, okay, so you're going to have to write this down. So what I had them do was I said, okay, I take a look at a speech. So they wrote that down. I said, and if it's broken or there's something wrong with it, they wrote that down. I fix it. And they wrote that down. And I told them at that point, that's the secret. And as you would probably guess, a lot of coaches raised their hand and we're trying to figure out, like, well, what does that mean? What I mean by this is trust in your style. Trust in the things that have gotten you to that national tournament. Because again, there is no recipe. There are things that can help you. There are things that can help students get to that next level. But just as you would know, I've been very fortunate. I've had numerous national semifinalists, national finalists in oratory at all the levels. I've had some wonderful students do really well in our state in California, state finalists, state semifinalists. But again, what's interesting about oratory is you have to bring your own spin to it. The students have to bring their own spin. So one of the things that worked for us was when as I've been coaching, is this idea that we have to make it very personal. So that being said, Noreen and I are going to share with you our philosophy on a good, balanced oratory, because the secret through it all is having a well-balanced oratory. So the three things I've always told my students, and Noreen heard this while she was a student with me, is what are the three things that we look for when we're doing an oratory? What's the first thing?
Make them laugh.
You got to make them laugh.
You got to make them think.
Make them think. And what's the last?
You got to make them feel.
You got to make them feel. So you want them to laugh, think, and feel. What's important about that is this, is that when you're in original oratory, what you're looking for is balance. So as you're trying to take it to the next level, what you want to do and be mindful of is, will my speech, even though it does well regionally, make it to the national final round stage? Now, in doing so, the key is balance. So are we looking for you to necessarily be the next comedian? No. Are we looking for you, when we're making them think, to throw some thesis at us where the oratory is so heavy that we can't figure out the logic? No. Are we expecting you to do a dramatic interpretation in the middle of your oratory when you're trying to hit a heart story or a kicker? No. What we're asking you to do is make sure all these three elements are balanced. Okay? Humor, logic, and then more than anything, feeling. Okay? Because you want that balance of emotion, humor, and logic. Because if you don't have it, then guess what? What ends up happening is if your oratory is relying too much on humor, too much on the dramatic aspect, or too much emotion, or too much logic, you're going to sooner or later find a judge that maybe that's not their flavor. Maybe that's not their taste. And end up, unfortunately, sometimes getting a lower score. Right, Noreen? So as we keep going, we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on in this video. But one of the things is I'll tell you is in 2011, again, very fortunate, we were able to qualify 2 students to nationals in oratory, and amongst the many that again have been blessed and humbled to have. But one of the things I'll tell you is that year I found that was, and I'm trying to give you a illustration on balance. That year we had a really great student who was phenomenal in oratory, but his humor his oratory, I should say, really relied on humor more than anything. He had logic, he had even a bit of a kicker, but it wasn't really, he was known as a funny humor orator. And then we had another student who also qualified as a power orator, where again, the humor really wasn't focused on, the logic was okay, but more than anything, it was more about the drama and the presence that she brought. So one of the things that I've noticed is in oratory, you have 3 different orders, okay? You have your power orator that's very dramatic. You have a humor or a funny orator that it just relies on their humor, and then you have what I refer to as a charming orator, somebody who can, just kind of come in just really well liked as their oratory. So I'd classify Noreen as a power orator, because when Noreen used to get up and give her oratories, right, Noreen? Like, you get up and you'd give these oratories and people would be like, oh my goodness. People would be scared because she'd come with so much conviction, so much power that sometimes, what did I tell you? Sometimes we got to light it up, right? Or lighten it up. So what happened in 2011 with these 2 orators is one lost a tiebreaker to get into the top 60 for nationals. Another one was maybe 2 points off. And what I noticed was one of the orators from our league, or from our district, I should say, that was really good, was kind of one that had all 3 elements, and that particular student advanced to the quarterfinals of nationals that year. So what I realized was you need to have balance. And that's the one secret I'll tell you about at nationals, is you need to have balance. You got to be able to find that middle ground, because that's going to be important. And so sometimes after you get to the qualifiers and you're done with the qualifiers, like, one of the big things that we do is, okay, how can we make sure that we can find mass appeal with every type of judge, with everybody who's out there? Because keep in mind, when you're either at the national tournament or NIETOC, there's probably a good chance you're going to be judged by people who aren't in your region. So coaches, those judges are going to be looking for something that's totally different, something totally different from what you may have thought of, okay? So that's one of the things that you kind of want to keep in mind as you move forward is, how can I help my student find mass appeal? Okay, so when we look at mass appeal in the next segment of our video, we're going to look at that in writing, performance, but more than anything, just overall concept of where we're taking the oratory, especially because sometimes it's not about rewriting the oratory, but sometimes it's about reworking that oratory for that upcoming tournament. So at this point, like I said, we're about to jump into that. Noreen, was there anything else you wanted to add, at least with our introduction here? Okay, then we'll see you in our next segment of how do we find that balance and where do we go from here. Okay, so welcome back to the talk on original oratory. The talk on Or no? Okay, so we're gonna move past that. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, and just keep this in mind, if you're already at this level, you know, again, I would say trust in your writing, trust in your process, and edit as needed. You know, I would say if you found maybe a different example that you wanted to use, or you know something different, but you don't have to. You don't have to rebuild or reinvent the wheel just because you're at these championship tournaments. Okay, that's always something. You know, trust with what you got there. Okay, when we're talking about performance, you know, I think one of the things that we really want to do is we want to make sure that it's well balanced. Again, when we say make them laugh, when I say make them laugh, Noreen, what did you take that as when you were in order, and what kind of advice can you give?
Okay, well, I think we should probably start by talking about the fact that everyone's humor is different, right?
Correct.
So I think one thing that oftentimes, even as coaches, we kind of find ourselves pushing almost the same humor onto our kids, or expecting them to be at this level of humor or humorous. And I think, you know, especially as a student, I kind of even had to accept that I'm not the most funny person. So, yeah, I'm definitely not. So when it came to having to make sure that I had that humorous aspect in my speech, definitely I for sure made sure that my jokes were catered to me and my type of humor, which was definitely sarcastic and a little witty and a little, you know, snarky, if you will. But I worked on it, and I made sure that with every joke I was working the room and it was fresh. But you just have to remember, and especially as a student, I had to remind myself that even if my judge doesn't have the same humor style as I do, all I have to do is do my part, and you know, and do my part of making them funny in my own style, and just kind of let it work out from there. And
that's also really important. What Noreen kind of pointed out was this idea of work what's yours. You know, work your work what works for you. You know, if you are sarcastic, if you are kind of goofy with your humor, or if you're over the top with your humor, work that. Because remember, this isn't like an interpretation where it's a drama or a humor where you're going to be behind a character. You're actually going to be giving a speech. So the only character you're really trying to sell is yourself. So be yourself, if that works. Because sometimes what happens is, you know, we'll get into the writing, or like we're trying to, you know, maybe add some different jokes for these championship tournaments. What ends up happening is all of a sudden you get kids who are like with requests, well, can I be more like this particular person, or something I saw on a national final round tape? And if they're throwing a joke out there that really doesn't work for them, again, it has to be genuine. If anything, it has to be yourself. It has to be authentic. It has to be the authentic student. So coaches, as you're pushing them to a level of authenticity that can be real, that's what I think people really connect with in oratory, is authenticity. So your humor should be what works for you, right?
Definitely.
Cool. So then, moving on from there, what would you say about making them think? Like, how did you approach it when, like, we used to talk about that, having to make them think?
I think personally, and I'm sure you would agree, out of the three aspects, that was probably where I struggled the most. I think sophistication, and that's really what's needed when it comes to that aspect of making them think. Sophistication, once again, looks different for everyone. And for me, considering that, like Tony was saying, I was more of a power speaker. So as far as sophistication, I had to really work on finding the different levels, because of course you can't just be at one note when you're teaching and trying to make them think. And another thing that I always had to keep in mind was just really being present every time that I spoke. And I had to really remember that I'm teaching people who have never heard my speech, who are really listening with open ears, even though for me, and as a student, and especially at this time of the year, you've heard it a million times, you've said it to a bunch of different people, you've already qualified to these national tournaments, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, who's really listening? But as a student, I had to be reminded by my coaches, like, people are still listening. And people still want to be challenged, and they want to think. So I was challenged with always being present, and always making sure that with every single sentence that I was saying, I was challenging my audience to think and to be with me with every word. And one thing that, especially as a coach now, that I've learned is how you, or what you're saying, like content-wise, word for word, is super duper important, 100%. Well, what's almost slightly more important is how you're saying it. Right. Because let's say I have a statistic, right, or just information that I'm really trying to give in my oratory, right? How I say it will really more guide the audience on how they'll feel about it. So like, let's say I have a statistic that says like 1 in 5 girls experience having to leave early from school due to like the inaccessibility to like menstrual products, right? Instead of me just saying it straightforward, I was challenged to always find new levels into how I would say it so that it would guide how my audience was feeling. So instead of just saying it straightforward, it's more of, and in fact, according to whatever source, 1 in 5 girls are required to leave. So it's really, like I'm saying, like it's really just about how you're saying what you're saying. And of course, it goes hand in hand, but it's really important to really come with that emotion even, or just like that challenge in how you're speaking so that we feel the purpose and the impact behind the information that it is that you're saying.
Exactly. So you're talking about impact. So that's the one thing about your logic. I mean, obviously, you're going to want to make sure that whatever claims or, that you have a warrant behind it. And what do we mean by that is there's a piece of evidence or, again, because people get moved by numbers. People get moved by statistics. And more than anything, that's the one thing when you're making them think is that it's that teaching aspect. Good orators speak well. Great orators teach. So that's what we want, is we want you to teach us through the logic here, okay? And that's why it's always important when it comes to statistics, articles that you can use, quotes that people would kind of be familiar with, things that can give you credibility. Because again, this is, when you're talking about the logic of your oratory, that's where the credibility is at. And that's one of the things is that you want to make sure that it's, again, balanced throughout all 3 parts of your oratory, or all 3 points, or depending on what you decide to do. But more than anything, I would say, again, in that aspect of making them think, you have to teach us. Okay? There has to be that point. Because again, if I can teach you something that you didn't know before, can I move you off that needle to persuade you? Okay? Because again, the big deal about oratory is it's supposed to be a speech to persuade. There should be that level of persuasion. Because if I'm not trying to persuade you, again, and I've always told my students, are you making statements or are you going to make a point? Right? And that's always key. Because sometimes while we're performing oratory, it can get a little robotic, especially when it's towards the end of the year. We've been doing it for so long. Am I making a statement or am I trying to make my point? Right? Which kind of also moves us then into our third aspect, right? How do we make them feel? Noreen, what do you think?
There's so much that we can go into as far as making them feel. So I know earlier we were talking about making sure that all of, of course, like at this point, it's kind of easy to assume that whatever topic that your student is doing, they're very passionate about, right? So I think one thing, especially at this point in the year, and with all of our students, we end up kind of falling into I've done this for this entire year, so of course, like I still have the passion and I still have the feeling, but oftentimes that genuineness that was once there like months ago isn't there at this time of the year, right? And of course, at these tournaments that we are now competing at on the national level, it's more important than ever before. So I think the challenge is always, so one thing that Tony has always taught me and that I always picked up as a student is that your speech, no matter what point you are in the speech, your emotion and how you are as far as your tone, it's always going up and it's going down. It's not a jagged thing, so you're not jumping from emotion to emotion and jumping from aspect to aspect, but it's a flow. It's a constant flow. It's not just one little plot diagram. It's a constant flow, up and down, right? And your job is essentially to take us on this journey, right? But at the main point of the journey is just the why, right? So of course, I think in every single speech, everybody has an emotional part in it, at least one, in some place. Sometimes people have them in multiple places. And sometimes we don't even realize as students that we have emotion in some aspects. And I think it's really about being present, and it's really about encouraging your students to think, to rethink, and to kind of circle back almost to the first time of like when they first started memorizing the speech of how a person should feel from listening to what it is that you're saying. So yeah, just remind yourself, it's about reminding yourself as a student of what the purpose is, what your audience is supposed to be walking away with, and just really making us think and just, yeah.
Because what's important about this particular one, and Noreen would agree with me on this, is that the humor, anybody can make somebody laugh. Logic, we can challenge. People can always think. But making your judge walk away because you made them feel something, That's going to make your judge remember, wow. But at the same time, what I would caution is this, because don't forget, your judge is going to be in around of 6 or 7 oratories, right? So a lot of, and this isn't to take away from those stories, but a lot of stories in oratory always end in death, whether it's suicide, somebody getting murdered, or some trauma that's happening to try to make our point. So one of the things I would say is those stories are good, whether they're a heart story or as we like to refer to them as kickers too. But what's really important is this: don't try to create the drama in your performance. Extol, pull out that empathy. Because if your judge, we just don't want your judge feeling bad for your story, or no, what we want them is we want them to experience that same kind of feel that you felt. And just like Noreen had pointed out, go back to your first love. Again, have your students go back to, and always remember that. Because how do we, there's a great song by Earth, Wind & Fire, After the Love Is Gone, right? And how many times have you do your speeches so many times and so many different ways that sometimes that love is gone. So what do? Well, we have to go back to it. We have to go back and understand what it is and what motivated us to write this speech. And it's usually not humor, it's usually not the logic, it's going to be the emotion, right? So when you're making that impact and you're making that emotional connection, remember, it's not about extolling, it's not about being dramatic. It's not about, again, making it over dramatic to make that impact. No, it's about connecting with your judge. And that's one of the things that I would also say is that sometimes when people perform, especially in particular with their dramatic moments, one of the things I kind of notice is that they'll look away from the camera or they'll look away from their judge and they don't try to connect. And one of the things that I've always said is that when you're in that moment, when you're in that emotional appeal, connect with your judge. Not on some deep level that, like, oh my God, like you've been friends for 10 years, because obviously that's not going to happen. But extol that empathy, because we're all human at some point. And particularly in the virtual world, in the virtual world, one of the things I would also kind of say is, again, due to COVID-19 and because of our virtual tournament status, we've had to go from stage actors or stage performers to screen actors. So you want to pop off the stage, but also keep in mind, that's where the humor comes in. That's where the teaching comes in, and that's where the emotion comes in, because we want to pop off the screen, but we want to keep our judges engaged. Because I've done it too. All of a sudden, you're judging around on your laptop, and all of a sudden the doorbell rings. Or all of a sudden you start looking at your refrigerator if you're by your kitchen, or other things in your house, you start getting distracted. So the way we keep people engaged is by doing what? We keep people engaged by trying to extol empathy, trying to connect to their human core. More than anything, because honestly, like I said, after 6 or 7, speeches, and if all of them end in trauma, if all of them are about suicide, and not that we're discounting any of those stories because they're all precious in their own way, but in the same way, how are we trying to connect through our message? Because again, at the same time, and that's why we talk about topics sometimes is, even though I was really impassioned about my topic the first time, how can I use my passion to connect, make that impact on my judge? Does it have to be groundbreaking? No. Does it have to be life-altering? No. But if we can take something away, and that's the thing behind making them laugh, making them think, making them feel, you need to have something that your judges can walk away with. Because if you don't, then guess what? Instead of you getting, first, second, or third, now you're in the fourth or fifth. As much as, again, so that's why we would say is mass appeal. When you're looking at the oratory and you're trying to prep for these big tournaments, do I have those 3 things? Am I going to make them laugh? And it's not falling out of the chair laughing, but making them smile, right? Do I have logic? But do I have logic that's going to make my argument? What's the best form of the argument in my oratory? And am I teaching through that argument? Because it's just not about, again, you making your claim and going, okay, boom, here's what I'm doing. If I can't connect on somebody in a real world, if I can't connect with my logic or with some of my supporting evidence, then what am I doing? Again, one of the things I always tell my students, and Noreen will remember this, hearing this, and sometimes she'd be like, okay, that's enough already. But I always just say, make your sources work for you. So when you're looking at small edits, or take a look at the sources, do these sources make an impact to what's going on in my speech? To the point that I can make my appeal to extol that empathy, because everything sets everything up, right? My humor is going to set up what? My logic, right? It's going to give me that opportunity to do what? Set up my argument so people will want to listen to me. But once I set up my argument, what's the knockout blow? It's that little tug on the heart. You get what I'm saying? Right? It's that little tug on the heart. It's about being able to connect to people and pull that empathy out so that at the end of it, you know what? We're sitting back on, again, and asking ourselves this question. Where in this child's soul, as a judge, we're asking this question, where in this child's soul did this oratory come from? Because those are the oratory topics that will make it to the stage. Those are the oratory topics that, guess what, get remembered. Those are the oratory topics where they're talking about, hey, I remember this national final round in 2016 and there was a student. Those are the ones that will always be remembered. And those are the ones that will last forever in the minds of judges, coaches, and other students. Okay? Okay, so as we're coming to a close here, Noreen, what else do you think we should probably talk about and kind of connect with? A few more tips, because again, this is a video just for tips. Again, I don't want to consider this like a master class, but things that we have incorporated, not only in my students, but also while Noreen was on my team as a student. When Noreen was on my team as a student, but things that we do now. What other things could we kind of give them a little tips of the trade?
I think one thing that people often take for granted in their oratories, because everyone has them, let's be real. We have these 3 different words that we don't realize the power in them. They're we, our, and us, right? So those are very unifying words. When you go up there at a national competition, regardless of what competition it is, and you go up there as a student and you are saying these words to me like we, our, us, you have to make that connection that we have been talking about, right? Regardless of what sentence it is, whether it's a sentence that's making us laugh, whether it's a sentence that's making us think, or if it's a sentence that's making us feel. I have to feel that unity when you say we, or if you say our, or if you say us, because that means that as a student, you're connecting me as a judge or whoever is in the audience with you. So that's why it's important to make these connections and to have these different balances and to have these different aspects. Because like I said, I don't think we treat those words as well as we should, because they can have so much more impact and power if only we were able to put some more emphasis into them.
So we sometimes refer to that as the we factor, because what happens is we want to write this oratory, or we help students find their voice, because that's always, this is what's so important, is that words matter. That's been our slogan here with NSDA. That's been a slogan that we've used on our team. Words do matter. But in order for them to matter, they also have to be listened to, right? So we're giving you tips on what's the best way to open ears. What's the best way to, get judges to listen to you, even if you are on video, or whether, hopefully next year when hopefully we're back to in-person tournaments, what is it really? And one of the things that we have found that's super powerful is what Noreen was just talking about, was that we factor. Because we can have a topic, I can have a topic that I'm super passionate about, but if I don't open myself up and invite people into why this is a passion for me, guess what happens? Sooner or later, we're going to start losing our judges during that round or during our performance. And so again, keep in mind, one of the questions is, and it's not too much to sit there and rewrite about, but why should I care? What's hooking me in with what's going on in my life, right? And so that's what it is it's that big we factor. Again, one of the things I would tell coaches is that it's always about growth, right? So if they're not seniors, always approach nationals as it's a growth tournament too. If they, if they do well, that's great, but have them. And the biggest tip we can give you on doing original oratory is when you're coaching students, have them become students of their event. So if it is going to be oratory, or if it's going to be dramatic interp or US extemp or what have you, they need to become students of their event. So they should be taking notes. What worked for those oratories? Maybe what didn't work for their oratories that they hit at all these different championship tournaments. What is something that I can learn? Maybe one student has cause-effect solution as their organization and they did it really well. Maybe somebody has problem cause solution. Maybe there's different, because there's a ton of different, organizations on how people do oratory. But the big thing is how many become students of their event. Because if you really want to do well at oratory, whether you're coaching students or to any of these kids who are watching this today, the one thing I will leave with you is this: you have to love what you do. Love what you do and know what you want. Because if you can do that, everything else falls into place. So it's about setting goals and trying to get through those goals at these tournaments. Being pragmatic in those goals too, because yes, everyone wants to be the national champion, right? That's cool, right? You get a big trophy, you get a big check, hey, everybody's cool. But I would also say though is this: be pragmatic and on where you're at, make some goals that are measurable, but more than anything, like I was saying, more than anything, become students of your event and love and know what you do. So know what you want, but then love what you do. Because sometimes you will have students who just do oratory for the heck of just doing oratory. It's not that they're connected to it. So as I go back here to Noreen, I'm going to ask you, Noreen, the big question. Why did you love oratory? I mean, you did it for 3 years, and you did it at a level that was exceptional. So why did you love oratory, and what was it that helped you get to that exceptional level?
What I loved about oratory was it was a platform for me to really talk about me. Every single one of my topics were very personal to me, even if I didn't do a very personal story in it. There were things that I either suffered from, or things that I struggled with, or things that I was just very passionate about. And I loved what I did. I loved the platform that I had to talk about what I loved to talk about. I loved challenging people, and I loved being able to have that feeling of, I know from the way that I performed, I know that my judge walked away with something. Regardless of whatever that something is, I know that they walked away with something. And it was something that was passionate to me. It was my perspective on that something. It was my voice. And I think remembering those things as a student and having a coach who reminded me that, there were people who were listening to me and people who wanted to be moved, and that's why they were in those rounds, of course. Are they kind of required to judge? Yeah. But at the same time, every judge is looking for something to listen to and something to latch onto. And as a student, it took some time, but as soon as I really grasped onto that concept, I really fell in love with what I was doing, and just the platform that I was able to have.
In my 24 years as a coach, that's a long time. Ooh, that's a long time. My 24 years as a coach, what I will tell you is the best oratories over that span that have stayed with me were the ones that were able to connect with me in a way that they drew me into their world. And they made me empathetic to what was going on. They made me feel what they were going through. And that's one of the things I will tell you is, again, it doesn't have to be over dramatic. But again, like we were talking about earlier, everything sets up everything. And, I think that's one of the things is that as you get into these championship tournaments, yes, it's also about telling your story, but it's also about making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to connect with our judges through humor, logic, and emotion. So I wish you the best of luck as you guys prepare those tournaments, and I have a couple of kids going to, again, really humble that we have some kids going to nationals in oratory. So one of the things I want to tell you is we're going to be prepping in the same way, but prepping in the same way that, again, that is passionate. And, some words I'll leave you with is, the first thing is this, is a line from one of the oratories I've coached in recent years, but the big one was be kind to yourself. Because more than anything, again, sometimes when kids don't break, or coaches, sometimes when we don't see the growth that we'd like to, again, be kind. Be kind to yourself, because guess what? This is a process. And we can only control this side of the ballot. Can't control the other side of the ballot, because judges are judges and they're going to have their opinion. And that's the problem with subjective judging. It's pretty brutal. I've seen a lot, I've been to nationals where I've judged around and went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And somebody on the other side, the other judge went 6, 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, and you're like, okay, here we go, And I'll be honest with you, I've had the pleasure of judging in final rounds at nationals, and kids I've given the 1 to end up 3rd or 4th, and I'm like, what? This, And again, that's the whole idea. This is subjective. but your objective should be to connect with your audience. So I want to thank Noreen, my assistant coach, for joining me in this little talk. Again, these were some tips. If you do and if you would like to, please feel free to reach out to me. If you want me to go into deeper detail, my email is speechcoachtony, one word, @gmail.com. So should you, again, consider this video and always consider me as a resource, no matter which coach it is, no matter where you're coming from. And like I said, good luck with what's going on. Good luck to the students who are performing here at the National Individual Events Tournament of Champions. And I want to take a moment to thank Matt Himes and Joni Anker and Damon Wilson for not just giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts, but also giving kids the opportunity to continue to compete at such a national level with such prestige and really giving them the experience. So thanks again, and we're gonna wish you the best from Los Angeles, California. Hope you guys are all doing well, and we'll see you at Nationals, and hopefully in the final rounds at NITOC. Good luck.